pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Matt, could we have roll call, please?
Counselor Thompson,
Here.
Demas,
Here.
Pedri,
Here.
Zadi,
Here.
Hickerson,
Here.
Hanson,
Here.
Vitolo, Robinson, Mayor Mickelson.
Here. Okay, before we move into the main event with Ms. Graves, I'd like to take a minute to congratulate Chief Ayers Palmer. He's just finished his bachelor's degree in criminal justice, and we have some cupcakes. So everybody from the audience, if you guys would like to come partake in a cupcake and congratulate him, I'd certainly welcome you joining us in doing that.
Speech.
Well, thank you, Mayor. Definitely unexpected. Thanks for my family showing up. Yeah, you must have seen when I turned in my reimbursements.
No, actually, I overheard your wife talking to a friend at an event,
Gotcha.
so she narked you out.
Well, definitely appreciate it. I started this job without the degree, obviously, and then when I got this position, I kind of felt obligated to get it, so I went back to school and just finished up. So thank you, I appreciate
It's
it.
certainly commendable and good leadership. Council, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Congratulations.
Okay.
You got to
Thanks,
catch up to
everybody.
your wife, though. She told me she's going for a master's, so you better hurry up.
That's true.
Yeah.
She is beating me there, but
Thank you both for joining us. So with that, cupcakes are delicious. I can promise you that. Trish made them, and they are tasty. Before we welcome Ms. Graves, the intent tonight is to present the city's wage study so that everybody gets the information at the same time. I'm particularly excited about it. I think that it would be really good for our employees and for the city and would resolve a lot of the issues that we have around salary compression in order to help people have time to process and think about what it would mean and come up with some good questions. We're not doing a question and answer session tonight. What I'd ask is that you send your questions either to your union representatives, to your department heads, or to me, and we will make sure they go to Lori, and then she can answer them together, and we can just put that information out. Particularly in speaking to the council, we're not focused or worried about cost right now. The question is, does this solution that Ms. Graves has come up with fix our problem? And if we can all agree that this is a good solution, then we'll move forward with what do the details look like? What does it mean? What is it going to cost? How do we work solutions out for people that would otherwise be negatively impacted by it? Because whatever we do, we're going to ensure that no one is harmed through the change. So with that, I would welcome Ms. Lori Graves, President of Graves Consulting, to give us our presentation.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I very much appreciate it. We really appreciate the opportunity to work with the city. We are a fairly small human resource consulting firm, but we specialize in public sector compensation. And so we work primarily with municipalities and special districts all throughout the Midwest, heavily in Colorado, Wyoming, Oklahoma, the Dakotas. And so we're really familiar with not only the types of jobs that exist in a municipal setting, but really the labor market that you compete in as well, which we know has been really shifting and changing quite a bit over these last several years. And so it's with that focus that we took as we began to work in this study. So I have a relatively short PowerPoint presentation I'm going to be going through with you this evening. There should be plenty of opportunity for me to expand on things if we need to as we're getting into it. But as the mayor mentioned, certainly happy to answer any detailed questions that come later in follow-up or set up additional sessions. What we're presenting tonight, I think in some ways is going to be a bit of a departure from your current structure and process, but in some ways not that different, right? So with that, I will share my screen and we will go through the presentation. Make sure this is going to work. There we go. Hopefully you're seeing the presentation screen.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So obviously this is the results of the presentation. We have been working on this study. I believe we kicked it off probably in July of this year. So there's been several months of work that's gone on into this collaboratively, working with not just with me and the other consultants on my team, but really deeply with your leadership team as well, because we have found that these studies and these projects are much more effective when they're done in a very collaborative way. Because even though we may be, experts on public sector compensation, we are never going to understand the intricacies and the uniqueness of your city the way you do. So being able to work collaboratively with your leadership team, I think has helped us come up with a really good presentation for you this evening. So again, I think I've already given you kind of the high level description. We do work primarily in public sector, and within public sector, while we do a lot of different HR functions, compensation is our biggest area of focus. So this is certainly our sweet spot, as you will. This is the team of consultants that were at some point involved in this project. I was the lead consultant on the project, but there was quite a bit of behind the scenes analysis done from each of the members that you see here. And I like to say we are a small but mighty team, and we tend to stay focused on the areas within HR that we really understand well. And this is one of them. So with that, I just want to start by sharing kind of high level intent and scope of the project. I doubt this is going to be a surprise to anyone, but clearly our goal is to ensure that the city can continue to recruit and retain the talent that you need to provide all of the services to your residents there. And one of the key ways to do that is clearly to ensure that all of your employees are being paid competitively to the market, right? And as I mentioned earlier, we know that that market has been shifting and changing quite a bit over these last few years. Probably more in the last 3 years than I have seen it change in my 30 plus years doing compensation. So it is certainly a really good time for the city to be undertaking a full compensation study. And while the bulk of what we're going to be talking about tonight is focused on aligning base pay externally with the marketplace and with the labor market, we do want to make sure that as we do that, we also maintain internal equity within your positions, meaning that positions of similar span and scope of responsibility are placed equitably on your structure, right? That is something that we know is also really important, and we want to preserve that. We also want to make sure that we build a pay structure and a process that allows each of the city's employees to continue to have their pay move forward in an appropriate, sustainable way throughout the tenure of their employment. Right? Meaning we know that it's critical that as you have people who have chosen to make working for the city not just a job, but a career, that through the course of their career, they can expect ongoing sustainable wage growth. And that's one of the things we were really trying to address here. I do think it's also important, and the mayor mentioned this, that no one will be negatively impacted through this process. Meaning if we were to go out and benchmark jobs and discover that maybe there were a handful of positions that appear to be in pay ranges that are higher than the market numbers we're pulling in, we are not going to recommend pulling those back, because we know there are always some unique market pressures that exist within an individual city, because you have other industries and other employers that you're competing with beyond who we may have data from in this process. And that's how wages get set that way, right? So our goal is not to pull things back, but to make sure that everyone is being paid appropriately and has an ability to continue to be paid appropriately in the future, right? So within that intent, our scope was our primary tool that we used was a custom survey that we did of other municipal organizations in your defined labor market. And that labor market, while it was primarily concentrated in Wyoming, there were also cities and towns and counties in the surrounding states that, while they may not be right next to you and you may not be directly trading talent with them, we know that you are competing in the same labor market they're competing in. So that gives us a much broader, deeper, and really more statistically valid data of information, a group of data to be able to build our recommendations with. So that's why we tend to look broader. From that data, what we're providing are recommendations for a completely updated pay structures and processes around how that would work. We're also going to be providing recommendations for implementation and ongoing structure maintenance, because we want to know that when we are finished, you not only have what you need to be competitive right now, but that you have all the tools and the guidance you need to ensure that it stays competitive as the labor market continues to move, right? And along with that, we would help with developing any policies or procedures that you might need as you begin to implement a program like this. So I'm going to go through our process a little bit. You know, the foundation of a process like this, really the most important things are first for us to meet with the leadership team, make sure that we understand the scope, the intent, that we have an opportunity to hear from every member of the leadership team what areas of concern might exist within their department, where they might be struggling to recruit or can retain, or where they see inequities. We also want to make sure we understand how things are laid out within the city, because even though we've worked with, you know, probably 80, 85 plus municipalities, everybody has a little bit of uniqueness in the way they organize their jobs. So we look at org charts, we look at your existing pay structures, we go through job descriptions, we go through how your jobs are placed on your pay structures. And then we met individually with every department head across the city, and some with a few additional leaders that were brought in, to really make sure that we understood each of the positions that exist within the city. Again, we know the jobs really well, and we can look at a job title and even a job description and feel like we know the right benchmark for that job. But many times in talking with the leaders, we understand that there is some uniqueness in what their requirements are for a position that we need to make sure we understand when we're benchmarking that. So we spend time ensuring that we really understand what the jobs look like there. In order to make sure that we have really good, statistically valid and relevant to you data, we did deployed a custom survey that we designed. We included a little over 50 what we call benchmark positions, meaning at least 1, 2, sometimes 3, 4, or 5 positions from every department, to make sure that as we're gathering external data, we have good data to anchor all positions in the city to. So we have made sure we pulled benchmark positions from every area. And when we collected that information, we not only collected their current actual wages being paid to other employees doing similar work within your labor market, but we also asked for high-level benefits information as well, so that we could look at this not only as a function of base pay, but really take a broader approach and look at total compensation. Once we have all of that information that we've talked about, then we really spend some time matching the positions that exist there in the city to the custom survey data, pulling that data, analyzing it, looking for any differences between the job that others might have and the job that you're asking people to do there at the city that we might need to make adjustments for. And occasionally we will find that we need to either blend multiple benchmarks together, because you might have a position where somebody is really doing a part of 2 different jobs, and we need to make sure we account for that. Or you might have a position that looks very much like somebody else's, but you might have a higher certification requirement or experience requirement that we need to make sure we take into account and value. So we spend a lot of time really making sure that when we are pulling external data, it is not just a good enough match, that it's really representative of what you're asking of your employees. The overview of the pay structure, as we are going to lay out our recommendations for what we think would work, we are recommending revisions to your pay structures that, in our view, aligns not only with where the market is right now, but also is structured to reflect best practices within compensation. Things that have become important over the course of the last several years for all employers who've been experiencing very similar concerns that you have been around pay compression, right? Pay compression gets to be a bigger and bigger issue as labor rates are rising and you are having to bring people in at higher rates than you have before. You start getting wages compressed against some of your longer service people. And there are some things you can do structurally to the way your pay structures are laid out to help relieve that. So we're recommending pay structures. We're also recommending the placement of every position at the city onto those structures based on the market value from the data that we pulled. There will always be positions that we don't have good external pay data on. For those positions, we place them on your structure based on what we call the internal relative value to other positions that have been benchmarked, right? So if we don't have good external data for a job, we look at other jobs within the city that we do have good external data on that have a very similar span and scope of responsibility. And the other thing that we do when we go into a project like this, particularly with a new client that we haven't worked with before, is that we look at the current range placement when we are making our recommendations, again, to ensure that where we're placing positions is not only equitable, but it also has no negative impact on your current incumbents, right? That is not our goal, and I don't believe that's the city's goal either. So we want to make sure that we are paying attention to that. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about current state. Again, this is probably a recap for most of you. Right now, the city has really two separate pay structures. One that has the bulk of the city's employees on it, which is what we would call all of your general government employees. And it also has your police employees all embedded in one pay structure. And then there is a separate pay structure for fire employees. So two essentially right now. The general government structure is very large. It's made up of a total of 99 different pay grades. A pay grade meaning a range that has a minimum, a midpoint, and a maximum. There are 99 of those. They are all 25% wide, which means the distance from the entry minimum rate to the highest maximum rate doesn't go higher than 25%. And all of those ranges are built 2.5% apart from each other, meaning there's a lot of overlap, right? Lots of ranges very close together and narrow with a lot of overlap, right? And there's pros to having it set up that way. There's also a few distinct cons, which may be a little bit of what the city has been experiencing as you've grown, right? Probably pretty significantly since that structure was initially put in. You do separately have a pay structure for fire that has just a separate pay grade for each position that exists within the fire department, right? So this is current state. What we're going to be recommending is a total of 3 separate pay structures. Still a pay structure for general government, which are the majority of the positions that exist across the city, but a separate pay structure for sworn police and a separate pay structure for fire. And we'll talk a little bit more about why that's important, but really the big takeaway here is that the labor market does not move the same for all types of positions, right? The labor market for public safety sometimes moves pretty differently than the labor market for general government positions. So we've found that it is much more advantageous for our clients to put those jobs on separate pay structures so that you can adjust them separately to make sure that each job is keeping pace with its own labor market. And public safety is definitely a separate labor market that moves differently, right? And it also tends to structurally have some differences because the length of someone's tenure in those type of positions also tends to sometimes be shorter than in other types of jobs because of the nature of the work. So we're recommending 3 separate pay structures. For the general government structure, which is the one that would have the majority of the city's positions, instead of having 99 pay grades, there will only be 18, which I know sounds like a dramatic shift, but keep in mind that probably the vast majority of those 99 are not currently being used. They're just there as placeholders. They are also going to be not insignificantly wider than your current ranges. Right now, they're 25% wide. What we're recommending, they range from either 35 to 40% wide. And this is really a key element because this is what allows for that ongoing wage growth and progression throughout an employee's tenure that we've spoken about. One of those things that allows you to address compression because you have a wider range to move people with more experience up higher in the range to keep them separated from the people that have less experience. So wider ranges that are now 10% apart from each other as opposed to 2.5. Wider ranges, but less overlap, which is why we don't need as many of them. So it tends to be easier to administer as well. So with all of that explanation, this is just a visual of what the proposed general government pay structure would look like that we are recommending. And I want to go through a few elements of this. If you look down here, down the left side, these grade numbers are really just numbers that I've assigned. You could use any numbering or lettering scheme that makes sense to you or that matches with your internal systems. I tend to start at grade 100 and work up from there. Frankly, just because I've learned over the years that nobody likes being in pay grade 1, so I don't start with 1. So we have them graded. You'll see that each of them has a minimum, a midpoint, and a maximum, and I have those numbers expressed both annually and hourly. Annualized is based on 2080, since that's the norm, even though I know you have several employees that work other work schedules than that. And then you can see over here these design statistics that we talked about. The bottom half of this scale is built with ranges that are 35% wide. They go just a little wider at the top for the higher level, higher skilled leadership positions. They get up to 40% wide. All of them are 10% apart. 10% meaning that each of these midpoints, each of these midpoints is 10% higher than the one below it. So there is still definitely some overlap in the ranges, not quite as much as there is currently, right? So this is just structurally what that would look like. Key thing that you would need to understand at this point in it is that with ranges that are wider than you've had previously, this would really require moving away from the current pay practice that the city has of getting minimum to maximum of range in 7 years, right? I know that there is a reason why that was put in place, and I certainly understand, to ensure that people are at least moving through the structure, but it also limits people from being able to see their wages continue to grow as they extend their careers with the city. And one of the things we know about our municipal clients, and one of the reasons we really like working in the public sector, is because people do tend to be very long service with the city. People do tend to make this a career, not just a job. And we want to build a pay structure that encourages that, right? So this would be what the general government would look like that we're recommending. A little bit of the benefits, again, we talked about this. It is a simpler design with less overlap in the ranges. No need to have as many ranges. The width that we talked about certainly provides more room for wage growth and therefore more room for the city to address and relieve pay compression. And having a structure that is built like this also allows you to establish an ongoing predictable process where every year you can determine how much of a market increase needs to occur. And a market increase would be an increase that would shift the entire pay structure forward, right? A market increase would make every minimum, midpoint, and maximum go up. And you do that to ensure that the structure itself is remaining competitive with the market. On top of that, you'd also want to make a merit increase recommendation for all of your employees. A merit increase would be the pay increase that moves someone through their pay range, right? So really 2 things should be occurring on an annual basis. The ranges themselves should shift a little bit to keep pace with market, and employee pay should move forward in their range to recognize more years of experience and tenure and growth with the city, right? So that's really kind of the high level overview of why we see this as a good time to make this type of a change. We're going to talk a little bit about the alternate pay structures. What we're recommending for public safety, both for police and fire, is a more what we call traditional step plan, right? What we just talked about for general government is what we call an open range plan, meaning that every pay range has a minimum and a maximum, but pay might fall anywhere within that range. On a step plan, each pay point within the range is defined, and your employees would move through those steps as their tenure continues with the city. Now, as we talked about earlier, with public safety, both with police and fire, step plans are by far what dominates the market. This is the more common approach for public safety. And again, it recognizes the fact, one, that these do tend to be shorter total career time based on the nature of the work. And because of the nature of the competitiveness of this type of work, we tend to condense those ranges so that people do move up to the top a little bit quicker. Keeping in mind that you would still be making what we call those market adjustments and still continuing to shift those ranges up. So you'd be seeing the merit increase would be predefined. You'd move to the next step. The market increase would be what the entire structure would move up each year based on what's happening in the labor market, right? Because we built these in a 7-step plan, you really wouldn't require moving away from this internal pay practice of 7 years top to bottom, because that's really what this is built around anyway. That again, we know this is different than what we're recommending on the general government side, but 95% of our municipal clients throughout this whole region, this is the way their plans are set up, right? And you can see that each of those have a step and then they max out. You'd see really a very similar structure that we're recommending for fire. We have different ranks. They have the same 7-step process. The same thing that we just talked about would all apply. The difference would be at the deputy chief level when you're talking about a leadership level position. We don't tend to build those out with as many steps because otherwise the top end gets so high that it starts encroaching on the leadership level positions above it, right? So we ensure that these rates are set up in a way that the minimums and the maximums are competitive, but that they are not compressing the ranges above them. Without getting into too much detail, one of the things I will point out on both of these step plans is that you will see that some of these rates overlap. So in other words, the very top rate of firefighter, that's also the same as the entry rate of captain. That does not mean that if you were a firefighter and you were on step 6 and you promoted, you would come down here and get no pay increase. You would move down into the next range and onto a step that represented at least X% pay increase. Whatever the city's policy is on how much a promotion should be worth, you would simply move to a step that is at least that far above where you are. So even though we see overlap, that does not mean anyone's pay would ever move backwards. So those are what the structures would look like that we've talked about. We're going to talk a little bit more about the benefits of laying out your step plans this way. First off, putting them into separate structures, both the police and fire separate from general government, allows you the flexibility in the future to ensure that those jobs can continue to move with that particular labor market, which might be different than the movement that's occurred in the regular general government labor market. It also provides each of your employees in those a very predictable and a very competitive path to go minimum to maximum of range. And it allows the city to establish a process every year where your steps are already built and what you need to decide on and negotiate is how much the market increase would be. Again, market increase being the amount that you would apply to every step to ensure that they continue to stay current with labor market rates. This step plan allows you to relieve and prevent pay compression. And it also ensures that you have an opportunity for all of your employees, whether they are new or longer service, to continue to see wage increases, right? Those step movements, it is certainly up for the city to determine what qualifies someone to move from one step to the next. Typically, what we see is that movement to the next step is a function of both time and performance, meaning another year of service and an acceptable level of performance. That does not mean that there wouldn't be time that if budgets were tight and it didn't allow, that steps might need to be frozen. So even though a step plan has rates already built out, it is not meant to be a guarantee that everyone, no matter what, moves to that. It's meant to show the path, assuming that funding is available. But we built this in a way that we think the funding is very reasonable. We didn't build huge steps that would be something difficult for the city to be able to maintain. With that, really, we've covered the bulk of it. For us, the next steps would be simply to finalize our recommendations based on any feedback that might happen following this meeting. And then when that has all been completed, we will provide a final written report to the city that documents in detail our process, our findings, and our recommendations so that you'll have all of that for your records. And with that, all I really have is an addendum that's attached that you guys can look at your leisure that has the high-level benefit comparison. Suffice it to say that the benefits are all very competitive. They're either competitive or highly competitive based on the information that we gathered from others in your labor market. So hopefully that was relatively clear and I did not go through it too quickly. I know it is a lot of detailed information that many of you are seeing for the first time and we've been looking at for months. So hopefully it was helpful. And if there's anything, Mayor, if you want to entertain any questions now, I have a little bit of time, or however you'd like to.
No, I think what I would like to do is we'll send out a copy of your presentation to all of the city employees and to the city council and give folks time to read through it and consider it and kind of look at it to come up with some really good questions. It's very important to me that we have buy-in from everyone. That everyone, or at least the majority of people, see this as a positive move for themselves and for the city. So that's kind of where I'm at, and it is a lot of information. And thank you for reminding me that while we may have been looking at it for almost 6 months, it's really new. So we'll send that out this evening to give people a chance to really read through it and think about it and get back to us with some questions. But thank you for giving us your time and thank you for your work. I'm certainly excited. I think that I'm a big believer that our job, not only up here, but down there, is to advocate for our employees, even when they're not advocating for themselves. And I think this does that. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you all very much. I appreciate that. It's been a pleasure. So I will be happy to answer anything that comes up later. Have a good evening.
Thank you so much. You too. And with that, our special meeting is adjourned. We'll reconvene in